The air was damp, heavy with the smell of oil and rust, as if the place hadn't been cleaned in years. Only a few lamps worked, buzzing and flickering like dying fireflies. My footsteps echoed through the long, empty halls, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I was exhausted. Another long day at work. My boss had piled on more tasks than I could handle, reminding me once again how lucky I was to even have this job. I stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home, trying to prove myself, trying to show I was worth something. But deep down, I knew the truth. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. As I walked through that cold station, frustration gnawed at me. What was the point of working so hard if no one would ever see it? My body ached, my eyes burned, and all I wanted was to get home. I stood in front of the timetable, jaw tight. Only one departure remained that night. A train I had never heard of before. The Midnight Express. I thought about wasting money on a cheap hotel, but the thought stung. Rent was due, bills were piling up. I couldn't afford to throw away cash on one night of sleep. No, I needed to get home, even if it meant boarding a train I didn't recognize. The ticket clerk avoided my eyes as he slid the ticket through the glass window. His hands trembled. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Not many ride that one anymore," he muttered. "If you do, be careful." A chill passed through me. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as nothing but an old man's warning. But when I stepped onto the platform and saw the train waiting for me, the laughter died in my throat. The train was ancient. Its metal skin was scarred with rust, its windows pitch black like hollow eyes. The wheels screamed as it slowed to a stop, the shrill sound cutting into my bones. The doors opened with a long sigh, like the train itself was breathing. At the entrance stood a conductor. He was tall, dressed in a uniform that seemed older than the train itself. His face was hidden beneath the brim of his cap. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He only stared at me. Something deep inside me screamed not to get on. When I handed him my ticket, he stamped it with deliberate slowness. Then, almost reluctantly, he pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. His fingers lingered too long against mine. His voice was rough, low, like a growl. "If you want to arrive alive, follow the rules." Before I could ask what he meant, his gaze silenced me. Without another word, he stepped aside and let me board. The carriage smelled of dust and rust. The leather seats were cracked and stiff. The lamps flickered, shadows crawling across the walls as if alive. I sat down, bag at my side, and unfolded the note. The handwriting was messy, uneven, written by a trembling hand. There were 6 rules. Rule number 1. After midnight, do not look out the window. I sat in the carriage, the ticket trembling slightly in my hand. I kept reading the first line again and again. After midnight, do not look out the window. I let out a small laugh, but it came out hollow, empty, as if it didn't even belong to me. "What nonsense," I whispered. Yet something in my stomach twisted, as if it was trying to tell me this wasn't a joke. The door of the compartment creaked. It opened so quietly at first I thought it was just the draft. And then he appeared, the conductor, the same man who had handed me the ticket along with that cursed paper. His tall figure filled the doorway. The uniform was old, stained, but somehow it still held its shape and dignity. His cap was pulled low, the shadow covering half of his face. "Is everything all right?" he asked. His voice was dry, firm, but weary, as if he had repeated that question 1,000 times before. I hesitated, then nodded. "It's just these rules," I said, raising the paper. "Did you write them? Or what does this mean?" The conductor leaned against the frame, staring at me for a long moment. There was a strange flicker in his eyes. Maybe warning, maybe pity. "These rules were here long before us," he said finally. "I only passed them on. Nothing more." "But why? Why would anyone forbid looking out the window? That's absurd, I argued. The conductor stepped inside, the door closing behind him. He sat opposite me, slow, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. He folded his hands on his knees and leaned closer. "For you it is absurd," he said softly, but there were others who thought the same. They said they weren't afraid, that they were strong, that the rules were just a trick. But, he paused, his voice lowering, "they are no longer here." A chill ran down my spine. And what happened to them? The conductor smiled faintly, but it wasn't friendly. It was resignation. "I am not the one who should tell you the whole story," he said. "Only the one who warns you. Whether you listen or not, that is your choice." I wanted to ask more, but he stood. His shadow stretched across the length of the carriage. He was already at the door when he turned back once more. "Remember, your eyes will betray you first. Do not look, no matter what happens." And he left. I was alone again, surrounded by the ticking of the clock. The air in the carriage grew thicker, heavier, as if I was breathing through a wet cloth. My thoughts spun out of control. What am I even doing here? I could have booked a cheap hotel room. I could have slept, returned in the morning, refreshed. But no, I had to save money. I had to prove I could handle this, even though my job was slowly eating me alive. I thought of my boss, who always said I wasn't good enough. Of my co-workers who went to bars while I stayed late into the night. Of all the times I told myself it would all pay off someday. And now I was sitting on a train that shouldn't exist, reading rules that decided between life and death. The clock ticked, 12:01. The air shifted. Like stepping into a damp basement, cold, heavy, stale. The glass beside me turned darker, not like night, but like emptiness, black and endless. Something inside me screamed to turn away, but my eyes betrayed me. They slid to the window on their own, and there they were. At first, only faint glimmers, then entire rows of eyes, dozens, hundreds, motionless, glowing, unnaturally wide, each one fixed directly on me. My heart pounded so hard, I felt the blood in my temples. I couldn't move, my eyes locked onto theirs as if hooked by invisible claws. "Don't look," I whispered to myself. "Don't look." The door opened and the conductor stepped in again. "It is not too late yet," he said quietly. "Turn away, otherwise they will follow you until the very end." With the last of my strength, I shut my eyes. I held them closed until tears slid down my cheeks. And when I opened them, they were gone. The glass was dark, silent, but in my head, only one thought echoed. "They've already seen you." Rule number 2. Do not answer the man with the yellow hat. The train rushed through the darkness. The wheels hammered against the rails in a steady rhythm, like the beating of a heart. Above me, the lamps flickered. Each buzz, each crackle crawled under my skin. In my fingers, I clutched the paper. The words burned into my eyes. "If a man with a yellow hat sits with you, do not answer any of his questions." I swallowed hard. Yellow hat. It sounded absurd, like some cruel joke. And yet, deep inside, I knew it meant something dangerous. The air thickened. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, charged. Every sound, every creak seemed sharper. And then I heard it. Shh. The door at the end of the corridor slid open. Footsteps followed, slow, measured. Clack, clack, clack. I couldn't resist. I raised my head. A tall man stepped into the carriage, all in black. A long coat dragged across the floor, gloves glinted faintly under the dim light, and on his head, a wide yellow hat. The only thing the lamps truly touched, as if the world itself wanted me to see it. His face was hidden under shadow. He sat across from me, slowly, deliberately, like someone who knew he belonged here. Silence stretched. I felt his gaze on me, sharp and piercing, though I could not see his eyes. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, soft, almost polite. "Where are you going?" My chest tightened, words pressed against my lips. The instinct to reply was overwhelming. But I remembered, rule number 2, no answers. I clenched my jaw and stayed silent. The man leaned forward. The brim of his hat cast a long shadow across the table between us. "Do you know who else is traveling with you tonight?" The air grew colder. My breath turned white. Goosebumps prickled across my arms. The door opened again. This time, it was the conductor. For a moment, his eyes flickered to me, warning me, pleading with me. And then he turned to the man with the yellow hat. He bowed his head slightly, his voice trembling, submissive. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" The man didn't answer. He simply lifted his gloved hand and tapped 3 times on the table. The conductor lowered his head immediately. "Of course, right away," he whispered, and hurried out. I was alone again, alone with the man in the yellow hat. "You look familiar," he said slowly. "Have we met before?" The words scraped against my nerves. My tongue ached to move, to say no. But the rule kept me frozen. I gripped my ticket so tightly the paper nearly tore in half. The conductor returned with a tray. His hands trembled as he placed a steaming cup before the man. The stranger lifted it with calm precision, inhaling the rising steam. Yet I never once saw his lips. The conductor lingered, standing at his side, head bowed, like a servant waiting for command. The man's voice sharpened. "He reminds me of someone." The conductor stiffened. His eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, fear plain on his face. Then he quickly lowered his head. "Yes, sir," he whispered. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The man rose to his feet. Slowly. The long coat brushed against the floor. He pulled the hat lower, shadowing himself further. He walked toward the door. The conductor stepped aside instantly, bowing deeply. At the doorway, the man stopped. He turned his head slightly in my direction and whispered, barely audible but sharp enough to cut straight into me. "Don't forget me." The door slid shut. His footsteps faded. The conductor stood frozen for a moment, pale and stiff. Then he turned to me. His mouth opened, as if he wanted to speak. But he stopped himself, shook his head violently, and hurried after him. I sat alone. My fingers dug into the crumpled ticket. My chest heaved, and I knew I had only just survived rule number 2, by the thinnest margin. Rule 3, if the train stops at a station with no name, do not get off. The carriage trembled. Metal wheels screeched and the train began to slow. The sound of steel grinding against steel cut through the night, vibrating all the way into my bones. I glanced through the narrow window on the door. We had stopped. The platform outside was drowned in heavy, milky fog. It looked less like a place and more like another world. At first I saw nothing. Then, through the mist, a wooden sign appeared above the platform. Its surface was blank. No letters, no name, just an empty board, staring back at me. And then, shadow. At first I thought it was only a mirage. But then, one of the figures drew closer to the window. A face. The face of a friend I hadn't seen in years. Mark. The one I once dreamed with, about building a business, about traveling, about freedom, and then he vanished from my life, suddenly, without goodbye. "Jack, come outside," a voice called. Clear, so clear my knees trembled. "Remember? We had plans, mountains, journeys, adventures. Out here waits everything we once talked about." A lump formed in my throat. My heart thundered in my chest. And in my mind, a thought pierced through. Maybe it really is him. Maybe I've been given a second chance. Maybe if I open the door, I'll regain what I lost. But then, I repeated the words on the ticket in my hand. "Do not step out." I began to wrestle with myself. If I stay, I may lose the chance to see him again. If I leave, I may lose everything I still have. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I understood this wasn't a chance. It was a trap built from my longing to turn back time, from the grief of losing a friend, a dream, myself. I clenched the ticket tighter and turned my gaze away from the window. The sound outside grew stronger. Mark's voice begged, pleaded, shouted. And then, other voices joined him. They sounded like everyone I had ever lost, everyone I had ever disappointed. The carriage shook, the doors rattled, as if hundreds of hands were trying to break inside. And still, I sat. I did not move. "No," I whispered. "Not this time. Never again." The noises began to fade. The fog outside the window dissolved, and when the train jolted and moved forward once more, I knew I had passed the test. But my heart still ached, not for what I had lost, but for what I had finally come to understand. Not everything that returns is real, and not everything that calls to you wants to save you. Rule number 4, do not turn around. The carriage swayed, and the silence was unbearable. The wheels knocked in a steady rhythm against the rails, and for the first time, I realized that if I let fear consume me, I would never reach the end of this journey. Where had I even boarded? What kind of train was this? Why did I let myself step inside so easily? Stupid, tired Jack, always pushing forward, always carrying the weight until everything falls apart. I looked at my hands. They trembled, and I remembered my childhood. My father. He wasn't a bad man, but he never gave me the attention I longed for. He was strict, distant, and when he finally did notice me, it turned into games I never wanted to play. One night remains burned into my memory. He turned off the light in my room. I sat in bed, the blanket pulled to my chin. He crept up behind me, laid his hand on my shoulder, and whispered into my ear, "Boo." Everyone laughed. My father, my mother, even my sister. But my heart almost stopped. Maybe that's why I grew up fearful. Maybe that's why I never stood up to anyone. Not to him, not to my boss, not to anyone. But now I wanted to change. I whispered to myself, like I was talking to an old friend. "Jack, if you survive this night, if you endure this ride, you won't be that coward anymore. You'll quit your job, you'll finally do it, and you'll live a life that makes sense." And what kind of life would that be? I already knew the answer. I love the mountains. I love the hikes, the fresh air, the silence. Since I was a boy, the forest was my second home. Out there, I could clear my head. Out there, I could breathe. In the city, I was just a shadow. But in the woods, under the stars, I was alive. Why shouldn't I do something that makes me happy? Why not follow work that fills me with meaning? Not sit in an office buried under paper, invisible. Not slave away for someone who wouldn't notice if I vanished. I had always dreamed of becoming a mountain rescuer, helping people lost where I feel at home, being the one to extend a hand when no one else could. It might be dangerous, it might be insane, but at least it would be real, something that mattered. I smiled bitterly. Maybe this was a test. Maybe this train was the line between the old Jack and the man I could become. And then it happened. 3 knocks, soft, but unmistakable, as if someone struck the seat beside me. My eyes shot open wide. My chest exploded with panic. No, that's impossible," I whispered. I sat in an empty carriage. No shadows, no passengers, only me. But then I felt it. A hand. Cold, heavy, lifeless, resting on my shoulder. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Every muscle screamed at me to run, to stand, to fling open the door and throw myself into the night. But then I remembered the words I had spoken only minutes before. No, I would not run. I was not the little boy trembling in the dark because of a cruel joke. I was not the employee crushed under a boss's heel, silent and obedient. I was Jack, and this was my trial. No, I whispered louder this time. No, not tonight. The hand vanished. as quickly as it had appeared. I doubled over, gasping for breath, soaked in sweat, exhausted, but resolute. Whatever waited for me, I would finish this journey. I would reach the end. And when I stepped off this train, I would begin again. Rule 5. Keep your ticket with you at all times. If you lose it, you are no longer a passenger. The compartment was silent, only the grinding of steel wheels, slicing through the night like a knife. I held the ticket tight in my palm, as if it could save my life. Rule number 5. Keep your ticket with you at all times. If you lose it, you are no longer a passenger. I squeezed it harder. What does that even mean? Raced through my mind. If I'm not a passenger, then what am I? What happens to someone who no longer belongs here? My heart pounded faster than the wheels beneath me, and then the door opened. The conductor stepped in. His steps were slow, heavy, as if he carried more than any man should. He stopped in front of me, his eyes locked with mine. "Do you still have your ticket?" he asked, his voice rough and broken. "I do." I showed it to him, almost with pride. He curled the corner of his mouth. It looked like a smile, but it was sorrow, not joy. For the first time, he sat across from me. And he stayed silent, just watching, until I couldn't bear it anymore. "What is this place?" I burst out. "What is this train? Why? Why are there rules?" For a moment, he said nothing. He only stared at the ticket in my hand, as if he could see more in it than I ever could. And then he spoke, quietly, his voice like the whisper of night wind. "Once I traveled here too, but I was not alone." He paused, his hands, calloused and old, trembled slightly. "My son was with me, too young to understand where this train was really heading, too young to be here at all." My stomach twisted. He had a son? He was young, the conductor continued. Far too young to face such a hell. They wanted to take him, just like they take anyone who breaks the rules, or simply draws their attention. He looked straight at me, heavy, unwavering. "He looked like you." I froze. "And what happened?" I whispered. His lips tightened into a thin line. I begged, I bargained, I screamed, I would have given anything. And they laughed. Then they gave me a choice. His voice cracked. They offered me this. If I stayed, if I served on this train, they would spare him, let him live, but I would never see him again. I couldn't speak. My whole body shook. "And? You agreed?" "I had no choice," he said. "A father will do anything for his son, even if it means dying himself. But they didn't kill me. They made me into something worse. They bound me here, forever caught between night and dawn, between life and death." I nodded slowly, though I didn't know why. My eyes burned with tears. He was here, because of love, because of his son. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He looked at me in a way that froze my blood. "Because when I see you, it feels like I see him again. Your eyes, your face, even that defiance you try to hide." He leaned closer. "Maybe it isn't too late. Maybe you don't have to end up like me." My throat was tight. "But how can I survive this?" He straightened slowly. "Follow the rules, every single one, even if it hurts more than you can bear, because if you do, maybe not only you will reach the destination, maybe I will too." I stared at him. He wanted freedom, just like me. Maybe we were bound by the same fate. We reached out. For a second, his rough hand touched my ticket, as if to make sure it was still mine. "Never let it go," he whispered. "Never." And then he stood. The door groaned shut behind him. I was alone again, but for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I sat frozen, my fingers clenched around the ticket so tightly I could feel it sticking to my sweaty palm. The train lurched suddenly into a sharp turn, and I lost my balance. For just a second, my grip loosened. And in that second, The ticket slipped free. It shot up into the air, spinning in front of me like a mockingbird. So light, yet it carried the weight of my life. "No, no, no," I whispered, but my voice drowned beneath the thunder of the wheels. The ticket drifted toward the door, as if something was pulling it. Not wind, not chance, but will, an invisible hand, trying to strip from me the only thing keeping me alive here. I lunged forward. My knees slammed against the hard floor as I threw myself ahead. My fingers stretched, almost catching it, then it flew again, straight toward the narrow crack between the door and the frame. The lamps flickered, and in that instant, I swear I saw a silhouette in the gap, like someone reaching from the darkness for my ticket. "No, this is not yours," I shouted. With one final surge, I hurled myself forward and grabbed the paper. It was damp, cold, as if strange fingers had just been clinging to it. I held on with everything I had, refusing to let go, even when it felt like something on the other side was still pulling. My whole body strained, muscles burning, arms shaking. And then the resistance vanished. The ticket was mine, still in my hand. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Scratches burned across my throat from my own nails, as if in the struggle I had nearly destroyed myself. And yet, I had it. Wrinkled, damp with sweat, but mine. I pressed it against my chest and shut my eyes. Now I knew this was not just a piece of paper. No, this was my final boundary, between life and whatever waited for me out there in the dark. The compartment was stifling. The lamps above flickered, their glow looking more like smoke than light. I held the ticket in my hand, my fingers so tense they turned white. On the ticket, the last rule, rule number 6, at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, no matter what happens, do not leave the compartment. I looked at my watch. The hands crawled slowly, painfully toward 3. "Why?" I whispered. "What happens at 3? At that moment, the door opened. The conductor stepped in. His face was grave. In his eyes, not a hint of irony or weariness. He sat down across from me and leaned closer. "Jack, this will be hard, but you must endure it. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, you cannot leave." "What will be there?" I asked, my voice trembling. He spoke slowly. "The things you don't want to admit, your fears, your regrets, maybe even the faces you'd give anything to see once more. But if you step out, you will never come back." The second hand reached the 12, 3 o'clock. The train jolted to a stop. The carriage shook as if a wave had crashed against it. The lamps went out, and behind the door at my back, the first sounds began. A tapping, as though nails were sliding across glass. Then, a whisper. "Jack, open up. Jack, we're here. Come out." My heart pounded. I knew that voice. It was my father. "Jack, son, don't be afraid. It's over now. Come out. Hug me." I gripped the ticket tighter. My throat was dry. "That's not him," the conductor murmured, as if reading my thoughts. "It's only what's meant to break you." Then another voice, my mother. "Jack, please, you're my boy. Come to us. Out there there's light. Out there there's home." Tears streamed down my face. I wanted to turn. I wanted to open the door. But the conductor's calloused hand pressed firmly on my elbow. "Don't look back. We sit with our backs to the door. That's the rule. If you turn, you lose." The sounds grew louder. The tapping became pounding, as if hundreds of fists beat against the door. Then came screams, rage. The whispers turned to roars. "Jack, you betrayed us! Jack, you belong to us!" Crushed between fear and longing, I shut my eyes. I whispered to myself over and over, "It's only a test, it's only a test." Time dragged endlessly, minute by minute, second by second. The train thundered, the walls trembled, but I remained in my seat, and with every passing moment, I felt the fear weaken, until finally, silence. The sounds were gone. The stillness was so sharp it rang in my ears. Then the train lurched forward again. The lamps blazed brighter than ever before. My watch read 3:05. The conductor looked at me. This time, he smiled, not with sorrow, but truly. "You did it, Jack." A few minutes later, a station appeared outside the window, but not an empty, nameless station swallowed by fog. On the board glowed a single word: destination. The train stopped. The doors slid open, but the conductor remained seated. His hands trembled, his eyes cast downward. "Jack, this is your end of the line. Go. This is your chance." I can't." I kept looking at him. "No," I said firmly. "It's not just my chance. It's yours too." He lifted his gaze to me, and in his eyes I saw both pain and fear. "I am bound here. That was the bargain. If I step off, I might not make it. Maybe it's not meant for me." I leaned closer. "All this time, you taught me that the rules were there so we could survive. And you were right. But do you know what I just realized? The rules themselves are not the prison. The prison is fear, and that fear, it was in your eyes, not mine." His lips trembled. "Jack," I reached out my hand. "If I could do it, then so can you. You've already paid enough. You gave everything for your son. Now, do something for yourself." He sat there in silence for a moment longer. Then his hand touched mine. At first, hesitant, trembling, and then firm, he rose to his feet. Together, we stepped toward the open doors. And beyond them was no darkness, no emptiness, but the light of dawn. Pure, bright, free. "See," I told him as we placed our first step onto the platform. "It was never a prison. It was only fear, and fear exists for one reason: to be overcome." The conductor took a deep breath. A single tear glimmered in his eye, but it was a tear of joy. "Thank you, Jack," he whispered. Maybe I'm finally free." And in that moment, I knew we had both succeeded. He was returning to his son, and I, to the life I would choose for myself. Thank you for listening. If you want more stories, don't forget to subscribe. Sleep well, and good night.